They skipped Mother's Day, then asked me for money. And I remember that morning like a slow turning season when silence grows heavier than storms. I woke up with a kind of ache that does not belong to the body, but to the heart. A quiet, pulsing reminder that some days hurt without warning. I had made tea for myself, watching the sun crawl across the kitchen floor like a child searching for warmth. And I thought, maybe today they will call. Maybe today they will remember that a mother is not a machine built only to give and give and give. But the phone stayed still, like a stone, and the house stayed quiet in a way that felt personal, as if even the walls knew that love had missed its mark again. I kept walking around the house, touching the backs of chairs and smoothing bed sheets that did not need smoothing, as if busy hands could calm a trembling soul. A mother always pretends she is fine, even when she is crumbling inside, and I had mastered that art long ago. Memories were moving through my mind with the softness of old photographs, them running through the yard, their laughter lifting like bright birds, their tiny hands reaching for mine, as if I was all the world they needed. Those were the days when love felt simple, when they looked at me not as a problem to solve or a wallet to open, but as the one person who would always stand between them and the world. But time is a sculptor that sometimes carves people into strangers. By afternoon, the ache had settled deeper, and I stepped outside into the garden, touching the petals of flowers I had planted with hope years ago, colorful promises that life can still bloom even after winters. I whispered, "Happy Mother's Day," into the air, knowing no one would hear it, but needing to say it all the same. Because sometimes you say things for the sake of your own heart, not for the ears of others. As evening came, a kind of heavy truth set in, that they had forgotten, not by accident, but by choice, because remembering takes intention, and mine was a love they no longer felt obligated to honor. I sat in the dim light of my living room and allowed the sadness to move through me without resistance, like a river carrying away pieces of broken expectation. Then, 2 days later, the phone rang. I knew the tone even before I picked up. The bitterness of silence replaced suddenly by the hollow cheerfulness that only appears when someone wants something. Their voices were warm in the way that felt practiced, the kind of warmth that comes after the weather of need settles over someone. And then the words came, gentle at first, then sharper, the way a blade glints before it cuts. "We need some money." A mother never forgets the weight of her children's voices, but in that moment I realized they had forgotten mine. The tone, the strength, the softness, everything. There was no, "How are you?" There was no, "We are sorry." There was no, "We missed you." Only need standing naked through the thin fabric of excuses. I listened quietly, letting their request float in the air between us, a fragile thing made of entitlement and assumption. They assumed I would say yes, because I always had, because mothers do, because love is supposed to be unconditional until it begins to drown you. And something inside me shifted, a crack opening in an old foundation, revealing the truth that had waited patiently beneath the years. Love is not measured by how much you give. It is measured by whether they remember you, even when they do not need you. I took a breath, steady and deep, like drawing strength from a well hidden inside the chest. I spoke slowly, not with anger, not with spite, but with a calm they had never heard from me, because this voice belonged to a woman who had finally seen the truth. I reminded them gently that Mother's Day had passed, that my heart had waited, that their silence had spoken louder than their words ever could. I told them I had spent years teaching them to value kindness, to honor people who love them, to respect the hands that held them through their darkest nights. And yet, they had forgotten the simplest gesture, a call, a message, a sign that I was still a part of their world. The line grew silent, cold, and startled, like a room where someone suddenly turned off all the lights. They had expected my usual softness, my endless yes, my unquestioning devotion, but life had finally asked me to choose myself for once. So I told them something they did not expect, something that pulled the ground from under their feet. I said, no, not with cruelty, not with punishment, but with a love that finally recognized its own worth. In that moment, the world shifted for them, and for me, and I could feel the shock in their quiet breath, the disbelief that the mother who always bent had finally learned how to stand. And that was the beginning of everything that followed, the moment when a forgotten Mother's Day turned into the truth they were never ready to face. The silence after my refusal stayed with me longer than their words ever had. A quiet, trembling thing that followed me through the rooms of my house, like a shadow learning to grow its own shape. For years, I had lived inside a pattern, a familiar rhythm where they asked and I gave, where they needed and I answered, where they forgot me, yet I forgave them before they even realized I was hurt. Mothers do that because their hearts are stitched with softness, even when life keeps pulling at the threads. But once softness begins to tear, it does not grow back the same. So the next morning, I woke with a different kind of stillness inside me, a stillness that felt almost like strength, as if my heart had stepped into a larger version of itself. I made tea and watched the steam rise, curling like unspoken truth, and I realized that for the first time in years, I was not waiting for their call, not hoping for apologies, not expecting affection that had long stopped arriving. I was simply breathing, and that felt like freedom. By afternoon, the sky had grown heavy with clouds, and I walked outside, letting the cool air brush against my skin as if nature itself was acknowledging a quiet rebirth taking place within me. The garden seemed different too, brighter somehow, leaves trembling in the breeze as if clapping softly for the woman who had finally remembered her own worth. I kept thinking about their shocked voices, their disbelief, their sudden stammering when I had said no. It was the sound of boundaries forming, the sound of a mother stepping out of the role they had written for her and into the identity she had forgotten she had. As evening settled, I sat near the window, watching traffic lights flicker on like tiny red and gold constellations, and I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years I had spent giving more than I had. Relief for the years I still had left to write differently. The next day, they called again, and the day after that. Their tone had shifted a little, less confident, a little more hesitant. The edges of demand softened into something that almost resembled humility. Almost. I answered the call because love, even when wounded, still hopes that maybe this time things will be different. Their voices came through the line thinner than before, like strings plucked too many times. They asked, why? Why now? Why this? Why had I suddenly changed? As if the years had not been speaking to them through every forgotten message, every postponed visit, every unanswered love. I could hear them trying to rearrange old habits, trying to press my heart back into the shape it used to be, but something inside me had outgrown it. So I spoke gently again, not in anger, but in truth. I told them that motherhood is not meant to be a one-sided story, where one person writes every chapter while the others only show up to take from the pages. I told them that I had felt invisible on a day meant to honor the woman who had carried them, given life to them, held their fears against her chest as if they were her own. And they had not only forgotten, but expected me to swallow the hurt and keep giving. I could hear them breathing on the other side, a sound soft yet shaken, like wind passing through a hollow space. They tried to explain themselves, saying they were busy, saying they had things going on, saying they meant to call, saying they loved me. But intention without action is a promise without a pulse. I listened, not because their explanations healed anything, but because sometimes the heart needs to hear what the mind already knows, that love is real only when it remembers. The days that followed moved slowly, like a river learning new curves, and I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way I had always rushed to help them, even when they forgot to ask how I was. The way I had carried their struggles, but never offered mine because I knew they would not know what to do with them. The way my love had become a quiet background music they no longer bothered to listen to. And yet now, after one simple, unfamiliar word, they had been forced to hear me clearly. No. Such a small word, such a powerful earthquake. A week passed before they called again, and this time their voice had changed in a way that was unmistakable. There was no sugarcoating, no false cheer, no hurried excuses, just honesty, raw and uncertain. They said they had been thinking. They said my words had stayed with them. They said they never realized how deeply I felt their silence. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift, not in them, but in me. I realized that I did not want revenge or guilt or regret from them. I wanted respect. I wanted presence. I wanted the kind of love that does not appear only when pockets grow empty. And for the first time, it seemed like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. I spoke quietly, choosing each word like a seed meant to plant a new future. I told them that love is not measured by money, by gifts, by grand gestures. It is measured by small moments, a call, a message, a thought, a thank you that arrives without being prompted, a heart that remembers without being reminded. I told them that I would always love them because a mother's heart does not shut its doors, but love without boundaries becomes a wound instead of a gift. The line grew soft again, like a curtain lowering after a long performance, and they said they were sorry, truly sorry, not the rushed kind, but the slow, thoughtful kind that rises from somewhere real. I felt my chest loosen, as if the air had finally found its way home. But inside the softness, a question remained, quiet and steady. Would this sorry lead to change, or was it simply another moment of need dressed as remorse? Time would tell, and I had finally learned to let time speak. That night, as I lay in bed, the moonlight spilling across my ceiling like silver truth, I realized something important. This story was no longer just about them forgetting Mother's Day. It was about every year, every moment, every unnoticed sacrifice. It was about a woman who had finally learned to see her own reflection, not as a giver without limits, but as a soul deserving of love, respect, and remembrance. And the real shock for them was not the refusal. It was meeting the version of me who had existed all along, the version who had finally stepped into the light. The morning of the third week arrived with a kind of quiet that felt different from the quiet before. Not the silence of loneliness or waiting, but the silence of a heart that had begun to heal itself, gently, without permission, without witnesses. I woke early and walked through the house, touching the back of the sofa, the old photographs, the warm cup sitting beneath my hands, as if greeting pieces of a life I had often ignored while pouring myself into others. For the first time in years, the day felt like my own. I stepped outside into the soft light and heard birds singing, the kind of song that does not ask for applause, and I realized how long it had been since I had listened to anything that did not demand something from me. There is a peace that comes when you stop shrinking yourself to fit inside the boundaries others draw for you, and that peace had begun to settle around my shoulders like a shawl woven by time. I was sitting in the garden trimming the edges of a small plant when the phone rang again, its sound floating through the air like a reluctant memory. I felt no dread, no tightness, no guilt in my breath, just calm. I answered. Their voice was different again, softer, slower, carrying the weight of someone who had spent time looking in mirrors they usually avoided. They asked if they could come over. The question floated between us, not heavy, not demanding, simply there. I told them yes, not because I owed them forgiveness, not because mothers are expected to bend, but because my heart had finally learned how to stay open and strong at the same time. When they arrived, the air around them carried something unfamiliar, the humility of someone who has finally seen the cost of their own neglect. They stood at the doorway, hesitant, as if the threshold itself was sacred ground. I saw their eyes searching my face, not for permission this time, but for understanding. They stepped inside slowly, as though entering a place they were afraid they had broken. We sat in the living room, where years of unspoken truths had woven themselves into the furniture, the walls, the space between us. They looked down at their hands, the same hands I had held when teaching them their first steps, and I could feel something inside both of us shifting. Then they spoke, not in the rushed tone of excuses, not in the forced sweetness of need, but in a voice that trembled with real honesty. They said they were sorry, not just for Mother's Day, but for years of leaning on me without ever glancing back to see if I was standing steady. They said they had taken my love for granted because it had always been there, like air, like light, like a sunrise that never fails. They said they had grown up thinking I did not need anything, thinking I was endless, thinking I was stronger than hurt. But when I said no that day, it was as if they had finally seen the human beneath the mother, a woman with feelings, with scars, with dreams, with limits. Their voice cracked and fell into the space between us like rain, finally breaking through a long, dry sky. And then they said something I never expected. They said they did not want money anymore. They wanted a chance to make things right. I sat very still, not because I doubted them, not because I was angry, but because hearing those words was like touching the softest part of a wound you thought would never heal. I told them I did not need grand gestures. I did not need apologies wrapped in guilt. I needed presence. I needed respect. I needed to be remembered not only when life grew heavy for them, but also when it grew heavy for me. I told them that love is not something you take from like a well that never dries. Love must be returned, in small ways, in simple gestures, in moments that say, I see you, even when I am not asking for anything. Their eyes filled with emotion, the kind that comes from realizing love is not an entitlement, but a blessing. We talked for a long time about the past, about misunderstandings, about old habits that had shaped us into versions of ourselves we had outgrown. With every word, a layer of distance peeled away. By evening, the room felt lighter, as if truth had swept through it, cleaning corners we had ignored for years. When they stood to leave, they hugged me. Not out of obligation, not because they needed something, but because they wanted to. A hug, gentle and real, the kind that says, I am here, I see you, I love you. And when the door closed behind them, I sat quietly, letting the moment settle inside my heart, like warm embers glowing after a long, cold night. The next days unfolded softly. They called not to ask for anything, but to check on me, to tell me small pieces of their day, to ask if I had eaten, to say goodnight. Not perfect, not sudden transformation, but effort. Effort that felt real, effort that felt earned, effort that felt like the beginning of healing. And one evening, as the sky turned gold, I realized something that wrapped itself around my heart with a gentle certainty. The shock they got was not from my refusal. It was from seeing the woman they had forgotten to see. A woman who had loved with open hands. For so long, she had forgotten how heavy they had become. A woman who had finally learned the quiet power of choosing herself. A woman who still loved them, but no longer at the cost of her own soul. And maybe, just maybe, they were finally learning to love her back in the way she always deserved. Not through money, not through need, but through presence, through remembrance, through a simple truth that a mother is not a pocket. She is a heart, a life, a human being. And love only grows when it is seen.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription motivates me to bring you even more exciting and dramatic HOA stories. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. I'll see you in the next story, where justice gets even more satisfying.